Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some extra credits. This time, oh boy, doing their extra history series on the Irish potato famine, Isle of Blight, episode 1. I am really curious how they are going to cover this. I should have maybe reacted to this series 2 years ago, has it been? I took a class on Irish history a couple years back, but I I don't really remember much anymore. I remember I wrote an essay. I had to write an essay a bit on the Irish potato famine, I believe, because we finished talking about the potato famine, I believe, around midterms. And so my midterm was related to the potato famine. And then the last half of the semester was talking about the 1916 Easter Rising, and then all of those political issues that arose for the vast majority of the 1900s that I forget what the nickname the Irish gave it. But yeah, I'm curious how Extra Credits is going to cover this. So before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Now let's go ahead and dive right in.
The first thing the farmer notices is the smell. An earthy rot in the fields. The
No, that's just the English.
Irishman walks into his potato field to find the plants turning brown and wilting. He digs up a tuber and finds it slimy like a bar of soap. When he slices it open, brown mucus oozes out. The whole crop is the same. It'll be a hungry year, but he will survive. Because this isn't Ireland in the famine year of 1845. It's the United States 2 years earlier. And this man has no idea how this blight will devastate the country of his birth.
That was a nice twist. I like that.
The Irish potato famine ranks as one of Europe's worst agricultural disasters.
The Ireland still has not recovered from the loss of population, I believe. At least back in, I think it was 2021, spring of 2021 when I took the class. At least at that time, still had not recovered. I don't know if they'll have recovered by now. I'm recording this in 2022, but I believe this will get uploaded in 2023. Or it'll be New Year's Eve, I don't know. No, this will definitely be uploaded in 2023 after New Year's. And the math in my head. So, but yeah, I don't think they've recovered yet, technically. I think that's including the population of Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland plus the Republic of Ireland together. I don't think they have recovered their population.
An event so momentous that it not only defined a generation, it scattered a people to the winds. When the blight arrived
more than a generation
in 1845, Ireland had a population of 8.2 million. Within a decade, though, a third of it was gone.
Yep.
Around 1.1 million died from starvation and disease, while 2 million immigrated abroad. Actually, you know what? Strike that. Immigration isn't the right word. It was flight, plain and simple, an evacuation. During the height,
I would probably call it an exodus. It's just them fucking getting out of there, man.
Of the famine years, when children's mouths were stained green from eating grass and dogs scavenged graveyards, people brawled on the docks for space aboard the overcrowded vessels. Most didn't even care where the ship was headed, as long as it wasn't Ireland. Yet Ireland was not the only country, or even the first, to experience the blight. The fungus responsible emerged in the United States in 1843, hitching a ride to Europe in cargo holds. Farmers attempting to strengthen European potato strains may have even accidentally imported it when they crossbred their potatoes with American stock. And strengthened by a rainy summer and carried by the wind, the fungus stormed the continent. During the summer of 1845, news of the blight filled European newspapers. Belgium had lost 87% of its potato crop. Flanders, 92%. Holland lost 70%. Germany and France got off relatively light, only losing a fifth of their harvest. Rumors of starvation leaked out of Russia and Poland. while English farmers saw similar devastation. Governments prepared for a season of hunger and instability. The potato, after all, was the staple diet of Europe's emerging industrial working class. This miracle plant, imported from Peru, could produce 2 to 4 times more calories per acre than grain. Cheap and easy to
But the reason why, and I'm sure they'll mention this, that it disproportionately affects Ireland is because of, if I'm remembering right, it is because of the land that Ireland has that is arable. Ireland does not really have land suited for flowing fields of grain. Their land, the potato works very well in being grown in Ireland because, again, more calories per acreage. And I believe the potato is actually fairly easy to grow. It is not a too demanding of a crop to grow. And so for a relatively poor island country like Ireland with not much arable land, the potato was pretty much the only crop they grew. But in Europe, on the mainland Europe and in England, they had way more lands. They had more variety of crop. Hence why and then of course England also had imports from Canada. There are other colonies that could sustain them as well. But Ireland would not receive those imports. There would be attempts by some members of English government that tried to help, but the English government on the whole just didn't do anything. It's not that one of the arguments when discussing this in the Irish history class that my class had was, is this did the English actively with the information that we had available, because of course we cannot read every single document available at the time, with the information that we had available to us, that we knew of, that we had read so far in that semester, did the English actively harm the Irish? Was it an active effort by the English, or was it them just not doing shit? Just them not caring? And I think I largely fall on the side of the English just not giving a shit. And in a way, you can also argue that them not giving a shit is also them actively harming, is one way to put it, which is probably where I would line up. Not caring and not doing anything is just as harmful as, can be just as harmful, probably the better way to word it, can be just as harmful as, actively trying to, kill the Irish. But, and that's why we don't see other parts of the world really get affected as much as Ireland from this potato famine, because other parts of the world can grow other crops, or they have the means of getting access to more food from imports or stuff like that. I believe, if I'm remembering everything right, which there's always a chance I'm not.
To prepare, it allowed Europe's shrinking agricultural sector to feed its booming manufacturing workforce. And between 1750 and 1850, the European population nearly doubled, partially due to the potato. Any threat to the potato crop was a serious problem. In fact, these crop failures would help spur the wave of revolutions that racked Europe in 1848. But here the story of Ireland diverges, because while all these countries experienced economic hardship and social change, Ireland alone starved. The reasons for that are complicated, but they boil down to 2 factors. The first was a land system that made Ireland uniquely vulnerable to a crop failure. And
Yes.
The second factor was human. A group of British leaders governing from London who saw the famine relief as a vehicle for reforming the Irish economy and instructing the people's moral character. Throughout the crisis, British policymakers would make economic reform their primary objective, with saving lives as a distant secondary goal. The Blight indeed was, as British politicians argued, an act of God, unstoppable and inevitable. The famine, by contrast, was the work of men. But that was still to come. In the summer of 1845, British Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel was tracking reports of blight. He worried about it striking England, of course, but he knew that if it took hold in Ireland, the result would be catastrophic. Technically, Ireland had been a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland
I wouldn't be giving them smiley face. Their relationship ain't happy.
since 1801, but in a practical sense, it had been the very first step in the British colonial empire. The English had ruled it directly or indirectly for centuries.
Yes.
In that time, the British
Since honestly, like the 1200s, I think it's the 1200s really is when they really owned the English owned a lot of Irish land through like English landowners or some shit like that.
Crown had gradually dispossessed native Irish Catholic families, confiscating their land and gifting it to English and Scots Protestants who were considered more reliably loyal, while Catholic countries sponsored a series of Irish revolts against the Protestant English, and tensions grew. The climax came when Oliver Cromwell reconquered Ireland after a rebellion, completing the process of land confiscation and totally replacing Irish landowners with English and Scots, the so-called Anglo-Irish. And it was bloody. Conservative estimates suggest that Cromwell's invasion, along with the famine it caused, may have killed 10% of the Irish population. To prevent another uprising, Cromwell and later British governments passed a series of penal laws restricting Catholic rights. Catholics could not hold public office, own firearms, or be admitted to the bar as lawyers. They couldn't own a horse worth over £5, vote, teach school, or marry a Protestant. There were restrictions on how they could own land, and when willing land to children, they couldn't give it intact to the eldest, and had to break it up equally among all their children. Churches couldn't be built of stone and had to sit far from roads, and they couldn't attend universities at home or abroad. And 80% of the Irish population was Catholic. These laws were designed to bar Irish Catholics from all forms of political and economic advancement. And while they were gradually repealed, the last vanishing in 1829, it would take generations for the Irish to recover economically. And on top of that, these landlords charged astronomical rent on the land, barely allowing the native Irish farmers to survive. And the whole thing took place in a system of middlemen so convoluted that, okay, here's an analogy. Imagine someone owns an apartment building today. That's the landowner. They don't want to manage it, so they pass it off to a middle person to manage. Now the middle person wants to make a profit and knows there's a lot of demand, so they jack up the rent. And to make more profits, they subdivide some of the larger apartments into smaller ones. Now,
isn't this what they do? Doesn't this happen?
Under the
I don't know if they subdivide. They might. They definitely jack up prices. But I don't know if they can really subdivide larger apartments just because of how apartments are typically laid out in design. You can't really do that without like cutting off one half of the room from like a necessity. Unless, of course, the middleman here goes in and adds the necessities to the halves of the rooms that they're missing or whatever.
Pressure of making this exorbitant rent, some of the building's tenants start to get roommates or rent some of their bedrooms on Airbnb, further subdividing their own apartment. Wow, this sounds really familiar. Oh, hi NYC,
Oh, yeah. Okay, shit. Yeah, it is real.
Didn't see you in this analogy. Anyway, that's basically what happened to Irish farmers. In fact, some of the landowners, known as absentee landlords, hadn't even lived in Ireland for generations. The trend was bad. Then events made it worse. During the Napoleonic Wars, Irish goods suddenly became a major part of British imports, as the war cut off suppliers in France. Things improved for the Irish, with many turning to new manufacturing jobs. But then, Napoleon was defeated. French goods returned, and the burgeoning industrial sector collapsed. Out-of-work weavers and tradesmen flooded the countryside, engaging in ludicrous bidding wars for small plots of farmland, promising to pay rents the land could never sustain. Irish farmers began cultivating land that had never been farmed before: rocky hillsides, beaches, and bogs. The land, subdivided already through the inheritance laws and the greed of landowners, got subdivided further. And middlemen for
Ooh.
those landlords, increasingly disappointed with returns from potato farmers, evicted whole villages to use the land for cattle raising, which squeezed the farmers even further. By 1841, 45% of all agricultural holdings were under 5 acres, a consequence of population explosion paired with a land system that depended on chains of landlords, often 3 or 4 deep, leading back to England. Only one thing allowed people to survive. You guessed it,
The
the
potato.
A single acre of potato plants could produce 6 tons of crop per year, enough to feed a family of 6. No other crop provided such a yield. But many Irish families were larger than that, and the rent still had to be paid. In the decades leading up to the famine, the shrinking plots of land gave most no more than a subsistence living. Ireland was already the poorest country in Europe. Before the subdivision, most families at least had a cow. But in the decades before the famine,
Oof.
the more expensive cow disappeared, replaced by a pig. Milk, butter, eggs, and herring disappeared from the peasants' diets.
Ooh.
Cash crops like barley and oats vanished, replaced by more potatoes. Visitors were shocked at the depth of Irish poverty. The majority of the country went shoeless, and many in the countryside wore literal rags. In towns, landless workers lived by the pawn shop, pawning their Sunday clothes after attending church, buying them back on Friday payday, wearing them to church again, and then repeating the cycle. But those same visitors were often astounded by the peasants' hardiness. Irish peasants were strong and often good-looking. Scientific
Nice.
testing, so popular in the Victorian age, found that the average Irish peasant was both taller and stronger than both English and Belgian ones. And it was due to their diet.
The
Eating
potato.
nutritious, vitamin-filled potatoes 3 meals a day. But in August of 1845, Irish farmers walked into their fields and smelled rot. The blight was in Ireland, but London had a plan to use this crisis to remake Ireland. A plan that would bring down Prime Minister Peel.
And that was the Irish Potato Famine, Isle of Blight Extra History #1. This was a well-paced episode. I really got no complaints here. They did a good job. For 10 minutes, it felt like a much longer video. It felt much slower paced, easy to take in the information, so I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.